Tonight's story is not simply about another threat in a fast-moving regional war. It is about a striking contradiction at the heart of U.S. messaging. President Donald Trump is publicly saying that talks with Iran are making great progress, while at the same time warning that the United States could expand attacks to include power plants, oil infrastructure, Kharg Island, and even desalination facilities if no deal is reached soon, and if the Strait of Hormuz is not reopened. That combination of diplomacy and escalation is what has pushed this story to the top of the international agenda over the last 24 hours. What makes this especially significant is that the core claim is not based on rumor or anonymous online speculation. Reuters, the Associated Press, The Guardian, and Al Jazeera all independently reported the same central development on March 30th. Trump publicly threatened broader attacks on Iranian infrastructure, while also asserting that negotiations were moving forward. That means the story is real, current, and strongly sourced. To understand why this matters, it helps to start with the exact shift in language. According to Reuters, Trump said the United States was in talks with what he called a more reasonable regime in Iran, and wrote that great progress has been made. But in the same message, he warned that if a deal is not reached shortly, and if the Strait of Hormuz is not immediately open for business, the United States would blow up and completely obliterate Iran's electric generating plants, oil wells, and Kharg Island. Reuters also reported that Trump threatened desalination plants, which supply clean water. The Associated Press matched that central account and added why it is drawing such intense attention. AP reported that Trump framed the message as proof that diplomacy was going well, but at the same time threatened what it described as widespread destruction of Iran's energy resources and other vital infrastructure, potentially including desalination plants that supply drinking water. AP also emphasized the strategic importance of the Strait of Hormuz, noting that in peacetime about 1/5 of the world's oil passes through that narrow waterway. So the first confirmed fact is straightforward. Trump did make the threat. The second confirmed fact is that he linked that threat to two conditions: a rapid deal and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. The third confirmed fact is that he simultaneously claimed diplomatic progress. Those are the core elements that multiple international outlets agree on. Now, before going further, it is important to separate what is confirmed from what is claimed. What is confirmed is Trump's public language and the reactions it triggered. What is claimed, but not independently proven in the reporting reviewed here, is Trump's assertion that serious progress is being made in talks with Iran. Reuters reported that Iranian leaders denied being in direct talks with the United States. AP similarly reported that Tehran denied negotiating directly, even as Washington said diplomacy was moving ahead. That denial from Tehran is central to the story. AP reported that Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Baghei said Iran had received a 15-point proposal from the Trump administration, but described the demands as excessive, unrealistic, and irrational, while denying there had been direct talks. The Guardian separately reported the same broad position, saying Baghei acknowledged a proposal via intermediaries, but said there had been no direct negotiations with Washington. That means the diplomatic picture, as of now, is still incomplete. There may be indirect contacts through mediators, there may be proposals moving through intermediaries, but the available reporting does not support a firm conclusion that direct U.S.-Iran negotiations are underway. In other words, Trump's claim of progress is part of the public record, but the exact shape and seriousness of the diplomacy remain unresolved. The next part of the story is about escalation. Reuters reported that although Trump has said the United States and Iran are making progress in talks, he has also been sending more U.S. troops to the region. AP likewise reported that while Trump has claimed diplomatic progress, Washington has been ramping up threats and sending thousands more troops to the Middle East. So, again, the public message is deeply mixed: negotiation on one hand, military pressure on the other. And that is where the story becomes more than just rhetoric. The Guardian reported that the risk of further escalation, including the possibility of a U.S. ground operation to seize Kharg Island, sent tremors through financial markets, with oil prices nearing record monthly gains. It also cited the International Monetary Fund warning that if the conflict continues to disrupt Gulf shipping flows, the world faces higher prices and slower growth. This is one reason the story has immediate global significance, far beyond the battlefield itself. Kharg Island is especially important here. AP reported that earlier comments by Trump suggested American troops could seize Iran's Kharg Island oil export hub. The Guardian explained why analysts view that as strategically important. Nearly all of Iran's oil exports pass through that terminal. So when Kharg Island appears in Trump's threat, it is not a rhetorical detail. It points to a possible attempt to target one of the most sensitive nodes in Iran's oil economy. Another element making this story so consequential is Trump's reference to desalination plants. Reuters noted that Trump threatened facilities that supply clean water. AP said the threat potentially included desalination plants that provide drinking water. Al Jazeera went further, reporting that Trump had now added water facilities to the target list after previously focusing on electricity and energy sites. That widened the discussion from strategic infrastructure to facilities essential for civilian survival. This is where legal and humanitarian concerns enter the picture. AP reported that the laws of armed conflict allow attacks on civilian infrastructure only if the military advantage outweighs the civilian harm, and that causing excessive suffering to civilians can amount to a war crime. The Guardian cited Amnesty International, saying that intentionally attacking essential civilian infrastructure such as power plants could be unlawful under international humanitarian law and could amount to a war crime if the harm to civilians is disproportionate. Al Jazeera also reported strong criticism from legal scholars and human rights advocates. It cited experts saying that deliberately targeting electrical and water facilities essential for civilian survival would amount to collective punishment and would be prohibited under international humanitarian law. So there is broad agreement across the reporting that the threat has triggered serious legal concern, even though those concerns come from outside experts and rights groups rather than from a court ruling or formal international legal finding. At the same time, the White House response is also part of the verified record. According to Al Jazeera, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said the administration and U.S. Armed Forces would act within the confines of the law. The Guardian separately reported Leavitt saying Trump would be interested in asking Arab countries to help fund the war. So the official U.S. position, at least publicly, is that the administration believes it can pursue its military goals lawfully, even as outside experts warn that some of the threatened targets would raise grave legal questions. Iran's response has also been firm. AP reported that Mohammad Bagher Kalibaf, the Iranian parliament speaker whom Trump said he was negotiating with, dismissed the idea of meaningful talks and described the contact efforts as a cover for further U.S. troop deployments. The Guardian reported similar remarks, including a warning from Iranian state media language that Iranian forces were waiting for U.S. troops to arrive on the ground. That does not prove Iran's reading is correct, but it does show that Tehran is not publicly validating Trump's narrative of successful diplomacy. There is another unresolved issue here that deserves careful attention. Trump referred to discussions with a new and more reasonable regime, according to Al Jazeera's account of his post. But Al Jazeera also reported that there is no public evidence to support the idea that a genuinely new government is now in place in Iran. So while Trump is using that language, the reporting available here does not independently verify the existence of a new regime in the political sense implied by that phrase. That distinction matters because this story is especially vulnerable to exaggeration. It would be easy to overstate it as proof that diplomacy is succeeding, or to overstate it the other way as proof that a wider attack is inevitable. The sourced reporting supports neither conclusion. What it supports is something more measured. Trump has combined threats of broader strikes with claims of progress in talks, while Iran publicly disputes the existence of direct negotiations and rejects the U.S. terms that it says were delivered through intermediaries. It is also worth explaining why this specific story is current, not recycled. Some parts of the broader Iran conflict predate the last 72 hours, including earlier U.S. threats involving Iranian energy targets. But the development being covered here is fresh. On March 30th, Trump renewed and widened those threats by explicitly naming desalination plants alongside electric generating plants, oil wells, and Kharg Island, while again coupling that language with claims of diplomatic progress. That new combination is why the story is timely right now. The economic stakes are immediate. AP underlined that the Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's key oil choke points. The Guardian reported oil rising toward a record monthly increase and quoted IMF concerns about slower global growth if the conflict continues to throttle Gulf flows. So even if no additional strike happens in the next few days, the rhetoric alone is already affecting global risk calculations, energy markets, and the diplomacy of neighboring states. The regional stakes are just as serious. AP reported that while Trump made these statements, Israel and the U.S. launched a new wave of strikes on Iran, and Iran carried out attacks affecting Gulf infrastructure and Israeli targets. That broader battlefield context matters because it means the threat was not delivered in a vacuum. It came amid active combat, regional spillover, and a mounting civilian and infrastructure toll on multiple sides. So where does that leave the confirmed picture tonight? Confirmed. Trump publicly threatened broader attacks on Iranian energy and water-linked infrastructure if a deal is not reached soon and if the Strait of Hormuz is not reopened. Confirmed. He also said talks were making great progress. Confirmed. Iran denied direct talks and called the U.S. demands unrealistic. Confirmed. Multiple outlets reported serious legal concern from experts over threats against infrastructure essential to civilians. What remains unclear is equally important. It is still unclear whether there are meaningful negotiations beyond indirect mediation. It is unclear whether Trump's threat is intended as negotiating leverage, operational signaling, or both. It is unclear whether Kharg Island or desalination facilities are actual military options under active review. And it is unclear whether the current combination of threats and diplomacy will reduce the risk of a wider war or intensify it. The available reporting does not settle those questions. For viewers trying to follow this responsibly, the best way to understand the story is not as a simple march toward peace or a simple march toward escalation. It is a story about strategic ambiguity in public, contradictory signals in diplomacy, and very real consequences in markets and regional security. Trump's message appears designed to say two things at once. A deal may be close, and the price of failing to reach one could become much higher. And that brings us to the current situation. As of the latest reporting used here, the U.S. side is presenting an image of confidence and pressure. Iran is presenting defiance and rejecting the premise of direct talks. The White House says U.S. actions would remain lawful. Outside experts say some of the targets Trump mentioned would raise profound humanitarian and legal concerns. Meanwhile, the Strait of Hormuz remains a central pressure point, and global markets are reacting accordingly. The responsible takeaway is this: the story is real, the threat is verified, and the contradiction in U.S. messaging is the news. But any claim that a major deal is already at hand, or that a wider U.S. strike is definitely imminent, would go beyond what the evidence currently supports. The facts show a volatile moment in which diplomacy is being asserted, denied, and militarily shadowed at the same time. That is where we leave it for now. A fast-moving confrontation in which words themselves are now part of the battlefield. The next meaningful test will not be the rhetoric alone, but whether any verifiable diplomatic channel produces concrete terms, and whether the pressure around the Strait of Hormuz eases or intensifies. Until then, the most accurate summary is not certainty, but tension, confirmed, immediate, and still unresolved.